Welcome to the Elokus channel. This is class number 15 in the discourse B'Shasha Ekdimu 5672. This is at the end of chapter 11, which, by the way, the Maamor of Shom is the third discourse in the greater book B'Shasha Ekdimu. This is the 15th class in the Maamor Shom Yisroel. And we're holding at the conclusion of chapter 11, which is going to conclude the Maamor. Let's see, I have a sense and a hope that we finish it in this class. Let's see if we can wrap it up. Sometimes I think I can take everything that's there and finish it, and sometimes it ends up being that is more to talk. But let's see how it goes. So without much review, the class number 14, we had explored that there is an advantage on the vessels, on the kalim, that is higher than the lights. Although the lights are in a state of dveikus, of attachment, and the vessels are in a state of separation, limitation, yet there is a quality that we discussed in the last class in the vessels, because the root of the vessels is completely unchanged from before the tzimtzum. The root of the vessels we discussed was the letters of the Rishimu, the self-limiting power of Hashem, and that wasn't impacted, that wasn't affected at all by the tzimtzum. Versus the lights, which come from the kav, which the kav, the beam of light that reintroduced into the concealment, into the darkness, into the black hole, experienced a shutdown and then a re-illumination. And because there was a shutdown, to a certain degree, the light is, on the one hand, it's the same light that was before, but on the other hand, it experienced change. The tzimtzum affected the light, as opposed to and that means that all the lights, which later translates as the lights of Atzilus, the souls of Atzilus, and eventually translates into all spirit and soul that we experience, our own souls, although they are in a state of attachment, a connection, and so on and so forth, but they do not register completely all the way into the Or Ein Sof itself. There is a certain interruption. However, the vessels which also exist on many levels, the vessels that exist in primarily making up what makes us feel ourselves, our bodies, the concreteness of our existence, the limitations of our existence, the definitions of our existence, generally all the aspects of our being that is seems to be a hindrance in our connection to God. Really, in that and in them lies the deepest connection, because the vessels have an uninterrupted connection to Hashem via, in essence, they're all, as we discussed, have the DNA of the Oisius HaRishimu, and the Oisius HaRishimu and the letters of the Rishimu are artifacts directly as they are, unchanged by the Tzimtzum, because all that was, as we said, when the Tzimtzum came about, it erased the infinite light, but the self-limiting power of God remained vaguely present, and from that trace of these vague oisios came about, through a whole long process, the kalim, the vessels. So now this is what we learned in last class, and now we're going to say v'zeu atam. We said it also, and this is really important to listen to class number 15 in continuation to class number 14, or else this doesn't have any relevance at all. And even if you listened to 14 a long time ago, even though I just made it today, but just in case you're listening to it with a great interruption, it's good to listen to 14 and 15 together, because they are very, very, they're flowing one after the other. This is the reason why the lights yardim lislabish bekalim. The reason why the lights go down to invest themselves in the vessels is because the root of the vessels, because they feel and they sense the lights who are in a state of attachment, and therefore they have a lot of feeling, a lot of consciousness, godly consciousness, know that they are missing something. and they realize and they can sense that the vessels hold the key to something infinitely deeper than they have. And although the vessels, as in their current form, is in a state of yeshus meaning somethingness and apartness from God, but yet hidden in that is the secret. And if the lights can only direct and elevate the vessels by bringing bittul into the vessels, by countering the yeshus, the arrogance of the vessels, by bringing the vessels into a connection to its source, the vessels then will lead them much higher than the lights can go on their own. So again, the lights descend into the vessels, is because the root of the kelim, that is higher than the lights, as stated elsewhere. And here he's speaking just about lights and vessels, but in other places, as he explains, that this explains also why a soul would come down and alive in the body. Although there is a Mishnah that says, that against your will you live, implying that the soul is forced and compelled to descend into a body. It's not like through the agreement of the soul. However, Chassidus, which is so gentle, explains that God is not forcing by whipping the soul into compliance. God forces by illuminating the soul. He seduces the soul to go down in the body. It says that the soul gets suddenly an awareness. When it's time for the soul to come down in the body, the soul is suddenly overwhelmed by the awesomeness of the body. In other words, all the time that the soul is in heaven, the soul is looking down at the bodies, at the physical material creatures in utter disgust. Shame on them that they live in such ignorance. I will never go down in a body. But before it comes time for a soul to go down to the body, the soul has an epiphany, the soul has a flash of the awesomeness of the body, of the shirish of the kelim, that the kelim are higher than the lights, and therefore the soul willfully signs the agreement with God to descend into a body. It puts its signature on the dotted line. Why? Because it sensed the quality of the body, and that's why it goes down. The same idea that we're learning that the lights go down into the vessels so nothing is forced. It's all gentle. And therefore, because of all of this, it's for that reason that the connection of God, all connection to God comes through bittul. Bittul means a surrender of self, so that you can be included in something bigger than yourself. So the lights do that, and the vessels do that. Like our soul and our body both surrender themselves to God. Like we say in our prayers now, Slichas time, Haneshama lach, the soul is to you, v'haguf shalach, and the body is to you. We bend our soul and we bend our body. An example of bending your soul is when the soul has a desire to do something, and you realize that a spiritual thing, the soul wants to learn Torah, and you're very, very excited to learn Torah, but there's a Jew who needs help. And God would like you to help this person, but for your own spiritual whatever. So the soul might be like now not in sync with God's. It realizes that God's desire is more important than its own desire, and it surrenders to Hashem. That's the bittul of the soul. That's just one example. There's so many different ways of explaining this. And then there is the bittul of the body. That's when the body just wants to do body things, and not interested in doing a mitzvah, and you force and you compel the body and kind of in a sense overpower the body and push the body to do godly things and holy things. That's called bittul haguf, the bittul of the kelim. So what he's saying over here is that the bittul of the kelim cause a vibration. They hit God in a much deeper place. They hit a nerve, if you might say, much deeper than the lights, than the souls. When you're shaking the lights, they stir God, but they stir a more external element of the Ein Sof. When you're bending the vessel, that is causing a vibration much deeper. It's hitting an essential nerve, so to speak, in God, waking God up in a much deeper place, stirring Hashem at the deepest place. That's the idea that the bittul kelim, the surrender of the vessels, magia, arrives l'mayla, even higher mebittul ha'eres, than the surrender of the lights. Shazeu inyan, which is the idea, and I remember this was a Shavuos discourse, so everything is within the context of Shavuos, the day of the giving of the Torah. Hagdamas nasa lenishma, this that the Jewish people, God made such a big deal that by the time of at Sinai, the Jews said, first we will do and then we will hear. And Hashem said, well, who revealed to my children the secret? Now, by the way, this is what the whole discourse began. The whole book began with this statement of the sages, that God said, who revealed to my children the secret that only angels, the secret of, it says over there, the idea that when the Jews said, we will do and we will hear, the angels came down and gave them 2 crowns. But the main point was because they put the doing before they would hear. If they did the hearing before the doing, it wouldn't have made such an impression. It made an incredible impression, because they said, I will do and we will hear. What's the idea? Because hearing is more a spiritual experience, more of a bittul of the neshama, and doing is more relates to the keli. Just simply, doing generally refers to an action. An action is more related to your body. Listening to something is more of a soul activity. Especially if you take the broader meaning of listening, which means understanding. Comprehension is more of an intelligence, is more of an inner experience in the human being, and doing is an outer experience. One relates more to the oil, and one relates more to the keli, one relates more to the vessels. Or in a deeper level, we can say that when you're hearing and understanding, that implies closeness. It's like to hear means, I'm hearing you out, I understand you, and then based on, if you say, I will do after I would hear, first I hear and then I do, means that there is I'm first identifying what you're saying, I first agree, that means I'm close to you. I'm close to your ideas, I'm close to your wants. It makes sense to me, I'm attaching myself, I'm aligning myself with your will. I'm absorbing simple words, I'm attaching myself, I'm absorbing you and your desire and your want, and then I'm doing. So then you're in a state of closeness. But when you're saying you're doing before you're hearing, means that everything inside of me maybe doesn't agree. I'm not interested, I don't have a desire, I don't understand why you want me to do this. I'm actually upset that you want me to do this because I'm not in the mood of doing it. But you know what, I'm doing it anyways. So if you think about that, that's a form of yeshus. It means the person who's doing is in a state of self, a state of distance, a state of removal from God, and then from the state of distance, you're bending yourself to God's will. So in that sense, you can understand that that's related to the vessels. Because what's the whole difference between the lights and the vessels? The lights are a continuum attached. They sense their source. They're always a continuation of the source. They feel the source very much. And the vessels are come about, like we learned in this whole Maamor, through a state of disconnect. And that's why the vessels have a state of yeshus and sense of self and limitation and all these elements, because they're far. Oiros are close, are in a state of dveikus, and kelim are in a state of non-dveikus, non-attachment. So we can understand how nishma of nasa, doing, relates far more to the keli. And that's the reason when the Jewish people said nasa before nishma, what does that mean? And God was so excited because nasa is really much higher than nishma. Because the doing of the vessel reaches much higher than the hearing of the lights, the hearing of the soul. The nasa, who are bittul shemetzad hakelim, the doing is the conforming to God's will, which is far more related to your vessel, to your body, to your ego, to your sense of separateness, and yet you're going to do like a servant serves his master, even if the servant is not in the mood and doesn't agree with it. It's what we call kabbalas oil, doing because you were told to do. And that's more emphasized in the doing. Hearing and understanding is identification and connection. As the Alter Rebbe explains in the Bir V'Kibala Yehudim, where he explains over there why by Purim it was the conclusion of the receiving of the Torah. The beginning, at Sinai, it's considered only the starting of the Jewish people accepting the Torah. The completion of receiving the Torah only took place at the time of the story of Purim, which is 1,000 years later. The Jewish people finally concluded that which they had begun at the time of the giving of the Torah. So the Alter Rebbe explains, because the main idea of the giving of the Torah is the bittul hakelim, that you have nasa before nishma, you have doing before hearing. And he explains over there, very interesting, Kabbalistically, he says that the whole avodah of Torah and mitzvahs is that through the bittul of the keli, through the nullification of the vessel, you draw down the light. The light comes as a reaction to our doing something. We do something, we bend and yield something for God, and as a result of that, we draw down a higher light, a deeper revelation of Hashem. The Ur comes down after the... So he says, by the giving of the Torah, they did that. What did they do? They said Nasa v'nishma. By them saying Nasa v'nishma, they already bended and yielded their vessels. They already came from their egos and nullified their egos to God. And therefore, they drew down a very powerful light. But the Alter Rebbe says those lights did not last. That's why the Jews were so wishy-washy, because all the godly influence they were drawing into their souls, all the illumination that was coming down, all the nishma, all the hearing that happened after the nasa, was always in a continuous state of fluctuation. It wasn't permanent. They didn't lock themselves into holiness. That's why they constantly fell into idolatry. For that, till the story of Purim, the Jews were struggling with deep idolatry and paganism and so on and so forth. They couldn't hold on because the illumination was up and on and off. It was flickering. The reason it was flickering because they only started the bittul of the kelim. They had a bittul, they nullified their vessels, but they didn't nullify it completely. By the story of Purim, the Alter Rebbe says, when they all were willing to die as Jews, physically be killed. Haman was threatening to kill them all, literally, and they could have all exited the decree by disassociating themselves as Jews, by becoming good Persian people. And by them not doing that, they all stood steadfast and remained proudly Jewish, although that means sticking their neck out to the sword. By them doing that, they achieved bittul hakeli. The words of the Alter Rebbe over there is zichu hakeli completely. They completely purified their vessels. It was a tikkun in the kelim. That brought down a far more powerful light and illumination that registered in their souls. And since the story of Purim, our connection to God is far more steadfast than what was before. We received it internally. We absorbed it. We digested it, so to speak. It became part of us. We became so much more Jewish. It's interesting that from that day and onward, we're actually called Jews. Earlier, we were not really referred to as Yehudim. We're called Yisroel, Israel. We're not called Yehudi. Yehudim, Jews, our name Jews, is really primarily developed in the Purim story. Because of this powerful bittul hakeli that happened in the time of Purim. And there the Alter Rebbe explains how the idea that nasa is the doing, is the bittul, is the nullification, the surrender of the vessel. Yesh Laima, we can also say, this is also mailas eskafia. This is also the quality of subduing oneself, al hishapcha, or transforming oneself. Anybody that studied Tanya knows that the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, which is the fundamental book of Hasidism, explains there are two types of... We're all created with an unholy side. Everybody. The question is, however, and our work is to fix that. How do we fix it? He brings there two methods, and therefore two paths. One path is the path of the tzaddik, the perfectly righteous. What they do is they convert all their unholiness. They transform the evil inclination into good. Hishapcha, there is no more bad inside of them. And then he says there, but not everybody's capable of doing that. Then he says there are most of us, the rest of us, called the Beinonim, the average people, who our service, we will always remain with a resistance to godliness, with a part of us that is not clean, not pure, not holy. But when we bend it and yield it, we do not give in to its shenanigans, to its desires, whatever it wants, and we do God's will. We override our laziness and our impulses for God's will. That's the subduing, the crushing of the animal spirit, of the spirit of Klippa, and that gives enormous pleasure to God. So, although we don't become a tzaddik, and we don't become a good person thoroughly, we have still evil inside of us, we can still serve God. And the Alter Rebbe explains how that service is even more precious to God than those who become completely sweet. So here he explains that these two paths, hishapcha means to convert yourself, hiskafia means to subdue, is the conversion is primarily related to the soul. A person who is very soul conscious, a person that has a ginormous soul, and has a powerful spiritual consciousness is able to overload their spiritual consciousness so much to increase it, until, like all unholiness, dissolves in front of this holy light. So that's the avoda of the light. The light, it's the avoda of increasing light, increasing holy consciousness, until that which was opposing gets kind of drowned out in the holiness. When the Jews says, holy, holy, holy God, the noise of the holy, holy, holy is so loud that it drowns out any feeling of unholiness for the rest of the day. And to the point that it converts the animal soul. But it's more a derivative, or it's more directed. It's the service of the oires, of the lights of the soul. The people who feel their bodies more and are not privy to such soul revelation, their consciousness is far more the material, physical consciousness, earthy consciousness, ego consciousness, self, a powerful sense of self. And these are the people who, at best, they can bend themselves for God's will. So that avoda is far more, the bending and the yielding is more the avoda of the vessels. And it's in Chassidus explains that his kafia, subduing, reaches deeper into God. See, the average people, that's why most people are made this way. It's almost like a rachmanis on a tzaddik. It's almost like a pity on a tzaddik who can't even serve God in this way. But we people who struggle so much, who think we're such losers because we struggle, we're actually doing the most amazing things in our struggles when we win, every time we win. So let's read it. This is also the quality of the subduing, the transformation. The ikkaring in eskafia, the main idea of eskafia, who ba'kelim dafk, is in the vessels, because we said before, in the vessels is where you have to, the vessels are full of self. They're full of yeshus. So people who are destined to be eskafia people, which means subduers of their negativity, is because by them the body is more dominant than the soul. Obviously, we need a soul. Without a soul consciousness, then we wouldn't have any desire even to overcome the body's mishigas. It's because we have a soul. But the actual work is in the subduing of the body. Versus the people who have such a high spiritual capacity, which means their souls are dominating to the point where they hardly have a physical existence. That's tzaddikim. And this reaches lamayla, this reaches higher, meaning it touches, it vibrates, it registers deeper in God, from the converted people who convert themselves. Like it's explained in the explanation, again in the Maamor, by Safas the Torah, or in the editions of Torah, or on Parshas Truma, I think it's in Parshas Vayakel, where over there, the Alter Rebbe explains the quality of iskafia, of subduing oneself over ishapcha, over transforming. We can say Yisroel. This will explain the actual. Now we're coming full circle to the beginning of the discourse. Beginning of the discourse, it says he opened up with the verse that Jewish people camped around the mountain, and the sages say it says in the singular because although there were a few million people, it says in the singular, he camped because they were all with one heart. Ke'ish echad b'leiv echad, like one heart. So he asks, why was that necessary before the giving of the Torah? And now he's going to explain. The giving of the Torah was the revelation of God's essence, as it expressed in the first word that God said, Anochi, I am. It wasn't a certain projection. It wasn't a certain light. It wasn't a certain revelation. It was God just being completely himself, open with us from his deepest self and saying, here I am. I, as my deepest, truest, highest, innermost, essential self, I am now, this is me, and I'm allowing you to see me as I am. In order for that revelation to happen, there needed to be something that would stimulate and stir and reach, because we know the rule is, Sirusa de latata, Sirusa de liela. Everything, there always has to be an arousal from below that awakens and brings about a revelation from above. Since this needed to be the revelation of God's essence, we needed something so poignant or so potent that can touch and reach God's essence. So here's the thing. The unity that the Jewish people had, which was and it's which was a huge chiddush, because generally, as you know, Jews they have, we bricker, we have so many different, we're always arguing, everybody always got their own opinion. Now he's saying something really interesting. If we would only be souls, if Jews would not be in bodies, if we would only be souls, we would get along beautifully. Because on a level of soul, we kind of melt into each other. We're so beautiful in harmony with each other, because we don't really, every soul, ultimately the souls originate in the simple, pure, infinite light of God. And over there's no differences, there's no pieces, everything is one. Where do we become so different? Where do we all become so opinionated? So that's because of the vessels. Not just the vessel, not just body. It's also the content. Like we learned, remember, the vessels are what create the chesed, the gevura. The fact that we all think differently, see differently, understand differently, all these elements are primarily the features that differentiate one from the other, come from the vessels. So and that's why each one, generally, it's very hard to come, because vessels are full of self. And that's why we all stand our ground. It's hard to fuse. And the beautiful thing at the giving of the Torah was that we all came together. And the point of the coming together meant that we all surrendered our vessels. The vessels bent and yielded for God, the kalim. And because it was a surrender of the kalim, it reached to the essence of God, allowing for the revelation of Hashem's essence to happen by the giving of the Torah. That's his explanation. Like one person. The idea that we are different than each other. This that our minds are different and opinions are different. That's a result of the vessels. Because from the souls, we're all completely one. Just like we said earlier about the lights, they don't have different colors. The lights are all the same. There's no differentiation. Same as the souls. If it's just pure light, the pure godly spirit, even the soul itself has a vessel and when it comes in general, we say the body is the vessel and the soul is the light. But in the soul itself, there is the light of the soul and the vessels of the soul. The vessels of the soul are the features of the soul. The lights of the soul is the point, the inner energy of the soul. So if we just look at the inner energy of the soul, we're all exactly the same. We're all a spark of the indivisible God. In their essence, we're all fitted with each other, exactly one. And the individual visualization is because of the vessels. And this, by the giving of the Torah, we all turned into one. Although it's not like we know by the giving of the Torah, their souls escaped the body. So maybe we can say that's when they became like one, when their souls, when they experienced the transcendental moment. But that's not what happened, because they were still, this unity happened while they were still very much grounded, while they were still very much themselves. They came, it was a few days earlier, it was when on Rosh Chodesh Siva, when they came to the mountain. And they're all coming completely with all their opinions and self-interest and so forth. And yet, when they came to the mountain, there was some kind of like moment where they all bended and yielded their own individual separateness and unified with everybody else. And that's the nullification of the vessels. And the nullifications of the vessels, as we said, touches the highest. Now another time, this is Gavald, appropriate for the time we're learning it, we also say on Rosh Hashanah, Jews all stand together in oneness. It says, Vayi b'Yeshurim melech, God is amongst Israel. Yeshurun is another name for the Jewish people. He's a king amongst us. B'Asif Rosh Hashanah, when the heads of the people get together. And when is that on Rosh Hashanah? All souls stand in unison. That's why we don't do anything sophisticated in Rosh Hashanah. Besides, the rabbi gives a speech, but the sophisticated Rosh Hashanah, we're very simple. We take an animal horn and we blow simple sounds, because we all turn into oneness in Rosh Hashanah. But what's that surrender? Again, the surrender of the vessels. The Kaya Rosh Hashanah is referring to Rosh Hashanah. Shem b'pchinas is achdus. We're all unified, v'hiskalolus, and integrated, mitzad bittul hakelim, because of the surrender of our vessels. And remember I said earlier, to accept the yoke means to surrender yourself in action. Not that I feel, I understand, I appreciate. Rosh Hashanah is not a day of learning Torah, of being inspired. Rosh Hashanah is a day of commitment, of surrender. And that commitment and surrender to God, it's the nullification of the vessels, dafka. And this is what unifies us. So the same is also by the giving of the Torah. They had a Rosh Hashanah moment. They had the surrender of their vessels until they became all unified like one person. And this was the great preparation for the giving of the Torah. Why? Like we said earlier, since by the giving of the Torah, the very essence of God revealed Himself. This is the Torah which is the drawing forth, the revelation of the essence of the Ein Sof. Because by the giving of the Torah, it was completely revealed. To be able to stimulate such a high revelation, why they bitala kalim dafka. We need something so potent, and that's not the soul. The soul would not affect that. The vessels would affect that. The Jewish people unified like one person. They are bittul shalahem through their bittul. And this was needed at the time of the giving of the Torah, so that the drawing forth of the Torah should come from the very essence of God Himself. And with this we conclude the Perek and the entire Maamor, third discourse, Mazel Tov. Let's do quickly the Kitzer. Kitzer is a summary on the whole last paragraph. We learned the difference of the lights and the vessels. The lights come in a state of continuous connection. And the kav is connected to the Orein Sof. But then the end of the discourse explained how there is a quality in the vessels. Because the letters of the Rishimu, they were never affected by the Tzimtzum, which isn't the case of the Kav and Nistalik. The Kav had a disconnect. In the last point that we were learning in this class and in the last class, the nullification of the vessels, Magia Lamayla Yoser, affect deeper. With this we'll understand Mashakos of Yisroel, the Jewish people came. This is the unity, the complete attachment that reached and brought about the incredible revelation of the giving of the Torah. Let me just share just a quick thought that's in my head because it's concluding the discourse. I just want to connect it to something that happened today that's exciting me very much, that's related to what we're learning. The Supreme Court of Israel, which is generally very, very, very not friendly to religion and to Jewish and to today, overpowered the Tel Aviv municipality, and who was, for whatever reason, we can understand, understandably, with Israeli stubbornness, was not going to allow segregation during prayer, to have a men's and women's separate prayer in a public place. They were saying public place, you can't separate between men and women, because yearly Jews would gather. A lot of people like to pray on the streets, especially since on Yom Kippur everybody comes to pray. So there were prayers held on the streets, and for whatever reason, the secular municipality was not going to allow for, they said you can't pray on the street. And today, so they took it up to the Supreme Court in Israel. The Supreme Court overruled and gave out shockingly, because the Supreme Court is always so extremely, let's just say, not accommodating to the observance of Torah mitzvahs. And today, shockingly, they overpowered. They said, what kind of business is this? Well, how would you not allow such prayer? It's Yom Kippur. What's with you? Well, I'm not going to give you all the reasoning. But in the end, they overpowered, and it's going to be segregated. It's a miracle of incredible proportion. But I think this is right before Mashiach comes. This is the nullification of the vessels. This is such an incredible revelation, the nullification of the vessels. If we needed something to go up in heaven to stir up the revelation of Mashiach, here you go. We've done tshuva on the highest level. If the Supreme Court of Israel bended itself, and it's against everything about that they usually stand for, this is an incredible bittul for Hashem. May this go up and bring about the great redemption now.